Dating back to ancient times, trenches have long been a major part of warfare. When strategies have drastically changed as technology progressed, so did the use of trenches. During the 20th century especially, trenches led to stalemates, leading to the development of new and even more deadly methods of warfare. During the Napoleonic Wars, the emphasis was very much on offensive strategies rather than digging in. Nonetheless, trenches were steadily on the rise to becoming more common in European warfare. In the New Zealand Wars, defending Maori built mazes of trenches to mitigate cannon fire, known as pa. Some historians consider the Maori as the first people to utilize modern trench warfare. Others disagree, as the Maori didn't have the capabilities to shoot back in the same way. Although trenches were used heavily in the Crimean War, they were considered out of date. During the Civil War, trenches combined with rapid-fire Gatling guns began to show the place of trenches in modern war. Throughout the rest of the 19th century, colonial wars began to show the combined effectiveness of trenches and modern war technology. Guns could shoot farther and faster, making it most effective to shoot from behind cover of some kind. With revolutions in artillery, the open field warfare of old was virtually extinct. Trench warfare is most often associated with World War I, and rightly so. In 1914, British, French, and German forces raced to the sea, constructing trenches all the way along the front lines from the coast to deep into France. The trenches rapidly transformed the war into the quagmire it is known as. As the majority of the war on the ground would be fought in the trenches, ammo was spent at a much higher rate than either side expected. The trenches of the Great War were often built in zigzags to reduce the damage of enemy artillery. Most trenches would actually not face no man's land, as they were built in massive webs with support trenches and rear trenches for officers and troops, not actively at the front line. Trenches evolved to have dedicated fire bays connected by traverses, which are U-shaped detours, so as to further reduce damage. Gas became a very useful weapon against trenches, as it could fill them up even with means in place to mitigate the artillery damage. The frontline trench would often have a lip known as a parapet, and a fire step to stand on when shooting out into no man's land. Barbed wire and sandbags were used to prevent enemy infantry from getting into the trenches. When a trench needed expansion, the most common method was sapping, digging out a trench from a dead end without leaving the trench's cover. As water often filled the ground of the trenches, duckboards were necessary to give soldiers better footing and to do the best to keep them dry. Although it is often assumed that disease was the biggest killer in the trenches, artillery fire accounted for 3 out of every 4 deaths. Nonetheless, diseases spread like wildfire and tore apart all who lived in the trenches. Parasites like lice and tapeworms were found throughout the trenches. Trench fever and gas gangrene incapacitated countless troops. Trench foot was notorious. For countries like Britain, it wasn't nearly as deadly as we often think, as they only had 75 deaths. For other countries, such as America, trench foot accounted for around 2,000 deaths. Soldiers had to live in poor sanitary conditions, in close quarters to their decaying comrades and stagnant pools of human waste, so it should be no surprise that disease was so common. After the First World War was over, many countries were horrified by trench warfare. All the same, many continued to use it, most notably France and the Maginot Line. Although the Blitzkrieg proved trench warfare to be outdated, with the Luftwaffe simply flying over it, trenches continued to be used in the Second World War, mostly in the Eastern Front. In the Pacific, the Japanese used complicated systems of trenches and caves to fortify their islands. Trenches were even used significantly as late as the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War. Even in the 1980s, trenches were heavily used in the Iran-Iraq War, as neither country had the technology and organization to fight a conventional, modern war. Today, trench warfare is hardly used. The horrors of World War I trenches still haunt our minds over 100 years later. Even though trenches have been used for centuries, their role in World War I is synonymous with trench warfare. While trenches may have been a brilliant strategic move at one point, in a world of modern weapons, they can only bring devastation beyond words. I've not had a chance to say this in a video yet, but I have recently started an Instagram and a Twitter page. Go follow me there to get previews at upcoming videos, or fun facts, or historical anniversaries, and to have a more direct method of communication with me and give me more suggestions. Also, very important, for the 1-year anniversary of this channel, I will be doing a Q&A. So leave questions in the comments or message me via one of the previous 2 platforms I mentioned, and I will put together a Q&A video as soon as I possibly can, either if that's enough questions or it falls on the channel's anniversary, which would be wonderful. Ask me anything from historical questions you have, to questions about the channel, to questions about my thoughts on historical events, and I will choose which ones work the best, and hopefully answer all of them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, like and subscribe. This is Matthew, and I hope to see you next time.
Goodbye, goodbye, where's the dear baby dear from your eye? Though it's hard to part, I know, I'll be sick of the death to go, don't cry, don't die. There's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, na boo toodaloo, goodbye.